Lecture is Basics of Culture. You can see the standards here in red. So here we go. Basics of Culture. First, we better define. Oh wait, I forgot some parts here. Some just diffusion stuff that we've actually already talked about. So here we go. Let's look at Basics of Culture first. Cultures are learned behaviors, actions, beliefs, and objects. So that is both material cultures, like things you can physically touch, like a cell phone, and then things you can't physically touch. So non-material culture, like religion or language or things like that. So there are three parts to this. There's four parts. I'm sorry, four parts to this unit in general. You have folk culture and pop culture. You have language. You have religion, and then you have gender. And all of these things are going to combine together to form just aspects of culture. I really like looking at the iceberg of culture. Like as I look at the surface culture up here, is material culture. It's things you can see. It's things you can touch. It's part of just the daily of what goes on in life. But then while you can touch some of the things on here in the bottom where the deep culture, it's kind of the inner space things, like the fact that you don't go up and talk to somebody right next to them. Like you're not actually like nose to nose. You're not like the concept of time. In the United States, we are very time-driven people, and alarm clocks, etc. Where in other parts of the world, Latin America and Africa especially, they're more relationship-driven than time-driven. So, like, if you show up late to something by 45 minutes, that's okay because you were respecting where you already were. Where that's very different than the United States, where it's time, time, time. Show up on time. For instance, one of my pet peeves: show up on time to class, and things like that. So it's really kind of different. I mean, there's really differences. We're going to spend most of our time on surface culture, but then how that affects the deep culture is definitely something to think about as well. So the cultural traits, the integral parts of a culture, that's all the things here. That's all these. These are cultural traits, 101. Things that are taboo in a culture are things that are discouraged by culture. So again, I kind of already hit on this with, hey, you don't go up and talk to somebody nose to nose. Or you don't just kind of just awkwardly stare at somebody for a long period of time. And there's tons of those. Like, so food is an example. In American culture, we don't eat dog. We don't eat horse in American culture. Where other cultures in the world, that is okay. I mean, a horse is just fine in terms of for eating in terms of nutrition. But yet we don't do that in America. Mainly, or it's not done in American culture because basically it goes back to French and British relations back in the 1700s, 1800s. We don't eat dog mainly because you've humified them. I mean, there's no reason from a nutritional standpoint we couldn't, but from a cultural standpoint, that'd not be the smartest thing of all time to do. So you AP Board kind of defines that there's different areas where specific traits or cultures develop. The cultural hearths for them here, the cultural realms, same thing, that where different cultures started and where different cultures lie today. And I think you can, like, just when you think of the definition of Europe as a whole, it isn't a physical definition, it's a cultural definition in almost every way, shape, and form. So like Australia, while not being physically in the continent of Europe, shares many of the same cultural characteristics of the continent of Europe. And so where you see these different aspects rely, those are your cultural hearths and cultural realms. We've definitely talked about cultural landscape a bunch in here, human activities superimposed in the physical environment. Think of Minnesota. Think of Minnesota and all the things that we do and how we show our culture based on the physical environment. I'm thinking of anything related back to the Super Bowl. Embracing the cold weather. Being outside for that stuff. A zip line across the Mississippi River. Snowmobiling down the Nicollet Mall. But then you also, at the same time, you had the cultural trait of just Minnesota nice. And when I was reading reviews from the Super Bowl, out of us, Minnesota hosting the Super Bowl, that showed up over and over and over again. Hey, Minnesota nice is true. Now, the last thing here, zones of transition. In a lot of ways, remember, these cultural hearths, cultural realms are vernacular regions, and so there's going to be zones of transition. And so, for instance, the further you get away from a hearth, the trait's going to look different. Just say, we have the Islamic world here. We have the Islamic world. And throughout the Islamic world, the treatment of women is going to be very different throughout. Going to be very different throughout, where Saudi Arabia is way more on the conservative side, where Tunisia is way more on the liberal side of things. This is a review slide. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. This is something you already had. These are cultural hearths, okay, and how it spreads throughout the world. Expansion or relocation. So people actually moving, ideas actually moving. People moving, relocation, ideas moving with expansion, and then the 4 types of expansion. Continuing on. Okay, this is one of the ways, this is hierarchical diffusion of how cultural spread of English through colonialism and imperialism. So on this slide, anything in green or kind of beigeish color here were colonies of the United States or Britain. So that obviously is going to spread English, Anglo-Saxon culture with that. And so there you go. Any place where English is the official or predominant language today. Almost identical maps. Are they perfect in terms of color? No, they're not perfect, like Ethiopia, for instance. But, I mean, well, Ethiopia was never imperialized, so it's also part of it. But you start to see, yeah, the colonial relationship was really important moving forward. All right, so now let's look at when cultures come together, of how that's going to play out. 3 definitions here for you to look at, 3 kind of 4. First one's acculturation, adopting a cultural trait while maintaining a uniquely different culture. So down here I have Psy in the bottom corner, Psy with Gangnam Style, the most seen YouTube video of all time. Very much Korean. Yet it was incredibly popular in the United States to the point where he could have pistachio ads, as seen down there in the bottom left. Adopting a cultural trait while maintaining a uniquely different culture. He kept this was South Korean K-pop through and through, but he tried to appeal more to the American culture by having more English in there. Second one, assimilation. A person or group give up their cultural traits for that of a different culture 3 to 4 generations. This is what we kind of see the arguments of in the United States, being a melting pot. That people have come here and people have melded together to form American culture, and it happens about 3 to 4 generations. And you think about, especially with language, how many migrants will come to the United States, and it takes time, but many migrants end up giving up their language. In the 18 and 1900s, that was more the case than it is now. But that's assimilation. The last one is multiculturalism, also known as a plural society. The coexistence of several cultures in a society at the same time. This would be kind of America's a salad bowl argument, where you start to see people are migrating here, but they keep their own characteristics to be true. So which are characteristics to themselves? So you have the salad bowl side of things, and you have the melting pot side of things. I'll let you decide which one you think America is at this point, or should be. That's your choice. The other one, I'll give you an example here. In Germany, Germany has a lot of Turkish migrants, and almost in Germany, they've basically formed a complete plural society where you have 2 different things going on, where a German culture and a German Turkish culture. In a lot of cases, that has gotten some ethnocentrism and some xenophobia going on, because in both cases, they don't like the other side all the time. So there are pros and cons to all of these, and we'll talk about those more as we move forward, but you should definitely know our definitional side of things. Now, kind of more cultural traits. In general, food, architecture, and how we use land is best determined by what's available to people locally. So, for example, rice, where rice is grown, this is where most people have rice. And let me move the so you can see there, down here. So, I mean, each dot is hectares of rice fields. Well, guess what? That's where rice is eaten. In China, there's actually a line drawn where there's the noodle line. North of that line is noodles. South of that line is rice, because of it's complete what's available to them. This is Bostons, Bostans, which are in Istanbul, which work to feed the people with vegetables and rooftops mainly. Other food preferences here throughout, and these are things that are available to them locally. So here's fish and chips, right? Why aren't these called French fries? Well, it's a British thing. Open fish sandwiches in the Netherlands. KFC being really popular in China. Vegemite being popular in Australia, and blowfish. Blowfish can go for upwards of $200 a plate in Japan, and it's because it has to be specially prepared by people who know how to prepare it, or else it's poisonous. Other things in this country that are just local preferences. Lutefisk. Oh boy. If you haven't had lutefisk, avoid it like the plague. Different types of pizzas, whether here's Chicago style with their deep dish, here's New York style with their very flat, thin crust. Detroit even has a style, which is a square pizza. It's like Jet's Pizza here in Minnesota. It's square pizza, that buttery crust. Or Sonic. How about Sonic down south? What's available to you locally? Sun Drive. Okay. At this point, I'm going to pause it to just kind of show you one more slide here with this. So just to think about this a little bit more, think of different cities around the country and then what food are they most known for? And that is definitely a part of the culture of place. So I'm just going to scroll through these here. And this is a website that based it all on the baseball teams. So like here's Atlanta, Waffle House. New York, pastrami and rye. Philly, cheesesteaks. And you can just see that this is part of the culture of the place and part of the cultural traits. There's a bunch of cities in the Midwest. Here's out west. Back to out east. There you go. Central part of the country, Minnesota, Juicy Lucy's, and back out west. So thinking about this again, food, just showed you tons of food. What's available to you locally, that's going to preference a lot of what the culture is. Housing is going to be the same thing. You're more likely to use your housing if you're in the grasslands, you're more likely to use grass. If you're in the woods, you're more likely to use woods. If you're in the forest, you're more likely to build tree houses, whatever the case may be. Cultural imperialism, we already have talked about. I'll show you just one more kind of here to end with culture. Well, here's an example of the housing thing coming into play. In this case, housing the dead. This is modern grave sites in Egypt, just burying people out in the sand. I'll show you one more here. So let's think about weddings. Weddings is a very cultural tradition of two people coming together. This is my wife on our wedding day. Okay, I think we can all agree, very, very traditional American look here. I think we could all agree that this is pretty traditional. Maybe a little take on here for Reese Witherspoon with a little pinkish color. Okay, how about this one? Kate Middleton, still very Anglo-Saxon in nature. How about this one, though? This is native Kosovoan. And this one here is dying off because of things like this are dominating. It's just the way it is right now, that most people have assimilated out of this tradition, have assimilated into things that look more like these. There are 3 people left in Kosovo that can do this, and this had been what women had worn to traditional Kosovoan weddings for a long time, and now it's basically all gone, and they've all gone into a different direction. What do you understand for this lecture? Get your definitions down, folks. Okay, you should know food preferences being part of the landscape. Here we go. These ones should definitely have down just the differences between enculturation, assimilation, and multiculturalism / plural society, and what happens when cultures interact with each other. And the last one, back to slide 1. Define culture, what's a part of it, and those cultural traits.